Well, first of all, good morning, Grace Brethren Church. Are you here?
Yeah.
Are you guys excited to be here?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, for you guys that are seeing us on video, Happy Mother's Day. I don't know, we don't have a Happy Mother's Day song. Happy Mother's Day to you. 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 Whoa! Happy Mother's Day to you. 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 So happy Mother's Day for all you guys that are watching us here and the other side of the ocean. For some of you guys that are in Europe that are watching this, I thank you so much for being here this morning. And happy Mother's Day. Okay, I like Mother's Day because Iris always cooks a special meal for herself and invites me. But anyway, this morning we do have a speaker. His name is Nathan Bryant from Toronto, Canada. I've been to Toronto, Canada once, and that was enough. Well, twice. Just twice. The second time, once was enough. It was. I talked to some Canadians, and I said, "Hey, what's the weather like in Toronto?" And I was going actually to Winnipeg. They actually probably call it Winterpeg.
Right.
And they said, "Oh, like here in the valley, and this is in the fall." And I go, "Oh, that's." So I went to Toronto in early November with 5 pair of shorts, 7 t-shirts, 1 pair of jeans, 1 plaid shirt, and a windbreaker. Only discovered when I landed in Winnipeg and in Toronto it was 19 degrees, and that was not without the windshield factor. And I walked out of the plane and the guy goes, "Sir, did anybody tell you anything about Toronto?" I said, "Well, it's mild weather." So I learned that day, never trust a Canadian.
Yeah.
Now, the reason I can trust Nathan because he's not a true Canadian, he's a transplant, so he's still got American roots with
Right.
him.
Right.
But anyway, I know him, and then he's, as I said earlier, he's got a twin brother named Phil. I worked with Phil one time in Vancouver, and to try to make headways into a little reservation that was just a few blocks away. So some of the native people were coming to his service. They were renting a theater on Sunday morning, and what better is to utilize a theater than to use it for church. But they had to be out by a certain time because people would be lining up for the matinee for the day. But I went there and I worked with him, and we worked with the tribe that was there, and so we had a really good time. So it's been really a blessing to sort of get older together. I'm older than they are, but getting old together. They said I met them around 1997, and so we've known each other for a while, I guess. Yeah. And in the very beginning, we had an opportunity to bless their ministries that were getting started and stuff like that, and so it's been a blessing. So anyway, he's going to be speaking to us this morning. I know we always record in like 32 minutes and then we stop, but you keep going. We just push re-record again, and we have a second part to it. So everybody, give a good hand and welcome.
Yay, Bryant!
Well, thank you so much, Pastor Robert. It's been amazing to me to be here for this the last couple of days. I've never been to McAllen, Texas. I didn't know it was so hot here this time of year. It was like crazy. It was 97 degrees, I think, yesterday. And I woke up on Friday morning. Friday morning? Friday morning it was 97 degrees, 93 degrees and 93% humidity. I'm like, wow, that's... In Toronto, I think it was 35 degrees and like 12% humidity, so quite a bit of difference. It's my joy to be here and to meet you and to connect with you. I've talked to Robert and his wife Iris for many years at conference, and we talked about things here and there, but I don't really know you that well. So to be here and to see your ministry and to connect with your people and to see the town and to hear your vision and to hear your heart has been a wonderful joy and privilege for me in this last couple of days. And so it was also awesome to be here last night, to be able to beat on the drum and to worship God and in your culture was just so incredible for me and encouraging to my heart. And to hear the stories of God's working in your life and how He's transforming people and moving people towards the gospel, that's pretty awesome stuff. So it's my joy to be here today. I bring greetings from our fellowship. We are part of the Charis. You guys are part of the Charis Fellowship of Churches. And I was sharing a little bit last night about who we are and what's going on with that. I won't get into all of that today. But our fellowship is small. We only have 220 churches in the U.S. and Canada. We have over 3,500 churches internationally. Most of those are in Africa. Lots of churches in Africa, which is awesome through the mission work that God's allowed us to do there over the years. But we bring greetings. I bring greetings. Our organization, Assist Church Expansion, is new. We've just become official this past year as the national organization for our fellowship. We work to help our fellowship become an expanding movement. We do that by helping churches revitalize and restart that are in trouble. We also work with churches to plant new ones in the campus. We also adopt new churches into our family. I didn't grow up Grace Brethren. I grew up in an independent Baptist Bible church in Maine, many miles from the opposite direction of here. And so I didn't know anything about the Charis Fellowship, though, the Grace Brethren movement, until I went to Bible college in Washington Bible College in Washington, D.C. And I was recruited by Pastor Jeff Thornley. He was pastor at one of the churches in Southern Maryland. And he allowed me to come on his staff, and I was an intern there for a year, and then he brought me on staff as an associate pastor for 3 years. And in that time period, I really got to love the fellowship, because coming from an independent Baptist background, I was really committed to the Bible and committed to the gospel, but what I didn't have was relationships with others. In fact, when I was the youth pastor, or the youth director for 1 year, I asked if I could connect with the church in the next town and do something with them, and I was told that we couldn't because they let their girls wear jeans, and so we didn't know if they were saved or not. But anyway, so we couldn't work together, you know. And so it was this independent spirit about the church. Although I love the people there and the gospel was presented, and so was the Bible. But to come to the Charis Fellowship of churches now, I actually get to work with other people who know and love Jesus, who hold to the Scripture, but we get to do it together. And we don't have to do ministry alone. And that's really a big deal for me. And I feel bad for you guys because you live way down here in McAllen, Texas, and so your connection to our family, to feel like part of the family, has got to be difficult and challenging. And so I bring greetings, and that you're known, and that we know about you, we're praying about you, and now we even know you better having been here. And so I look forward to many years ahead to a better relationship and connection with you. And so our organization started 5 years ago, but I've been the team leader for our fellowships work in Canada. And so we went into Canada in 1997 with my brother, twin brother Phil, and his wife Beth, and my good friend Bartley Sawaski and his wife Sarah and their little baby Maggie. And we went there with big plans to plant hundreds of churches by now. And the Lord has been gracious and kind, and He's used us. Well, we don't have 100, we have 4. And so we'll take it, because through that, hundreds of people have come to know Jesus as their Savior, and that's what we're really focused on in the mission of church planting. Over the last 5 years, the Lord has redirected my energy and focus in the direction of our team to actually work within our fellowship of churches to see if we couldn't do something to help the fellowship. The organization that Robert and I were part of years ago, well, you were part of Home Missions, I wasn't part of that, but Grace Brother North American Missions, which was the same organization, just changed its name in the 80s, went under in 2006. And so that organization didn't exist. And so there wasn't an actual acting agency for our family to actually work together to plant churches and to help churches that are in trouble. And so the Lord directed me to start this organization called Assist Church Expansion, and we work across North America to help our fellowship in that situation. Over the last 5 years, the Lord has been directing us and giving us blessing. My initial focus was planting churches. I'm super stoked about planting new churches. I'm all about planting new churches. As we started to push into working with the churches in our family, we realized that there's a lot of churches in trouble. We need to figure out a strategy to work with those churches. And God has allowed us to come up with a strategy to engage that problem, and we've been working at that pretty hard. We have 44 churches currently that we're engaged with out of the 220 in our fellowship, so quite a big chunk we have some kind of engagement with, and we're helping. We have 22 partnerships, churches that we're formally engaged with in a 3-year process to revitalize or restart or to plant. And so the Lord has kept us busy. Our team is very engaged, and we're pretty stretched at the moment, but the Lord has been pretty awesome about that. I want to share some of the stories with you about some of the churches in our family, because if you're like my wife, who I love, and a happy Mother's Day to her today, because I've already said to her greetings, but she's awesome. But she's like, I don't want to hear you talk. I want to see pictures and hear stories. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm more into the information. But she's like, I've got enough information from you. I want to hear more stories. So I'll just tell you a couple stories about what God has been doing in our fellowship, because sometimes, good news from a far country can be really a medicine to the soul, couldn't it be? And so we want to share some of that good news that God has been up to. Our fellowship has had a season of decline of churches over the last 25 years, but we're starting to see an emergence of new churches and a push to want to see new churches start. And so that's been pretty cool. Josh Cook is one of those guys. He was part of our fellowship in 2 different churches. Decided he wanted to plant a church in Michigan. Now, I'm not sure why he'd want to plant a church in Michigan, but he picked Chelsea, Michigan, which is a small little town, to plant a church in. And he parachuted his family in. We call it parachute church plant. We parachuted his family in there, didn't know anybody, didn't have any contacts. And he moved into Chelsea, Michigan, and he started to reach people. He started to connect with people. He started to work in the school system. He started to coach sports. He started to have conversations. He started to lead some people to Christ. And he started to gather some folks. And he couldn't get the group past about 25 people. He was trying to get it further. So he connected with me, and I and Mark Archer started to work with him. And he launched his church publicly back in 2018. And he's now running over 250 people. They have 2 services. They've seen dozens and dozens of people come to know Christ and get baptized. So we have a new church plant in Chelsea, Michigan. You can be excited about that, guys. You can be excited. We have a new church plant in Chelsea, Michigan, right? And they're actually looking to plant another church out of their church, which is awesome. That's what we want to see. We want to see healthy, thriving churches that are reaching lost people and reproducing. Because healthy things grow and reproduce. And we're looking to see that realized. Another couple of churches I want to talk to you about is one of the churches is Movement Church. Mark Archer, who's our director of church planning for our organization and for our fellowship, he planted Movement Church 12 years ago. And when we planted Movement Church, he was very excited about that. Now, in Ohio, where he's from, Columbus area, we have lots of churches, and we have a lot of big churches in Columbus, Ohio. So it's not that hard to find resources and people to help you planting in Columbus because we have a lot of churches there, which is awesome. So he was able to plant with quite a bit of strength. He planted in Hilliard, which is on the west side of Columbus. But when he planted the church, on the very first day he planted the church, the first Sunday morning, the first offering he took, he said, 5% of every offering we ever receive at our church, we're going to put aside for church planting. So from the very beginning, they were committed to church planting, not just with their mouth, but with their pocketbook, right? So they started putting money away. So 5 years later, he's got a pretty good chunk of money because the church is growing well. He's got over 200 people, and things are going well with the church. He's got a pile of money. He said, well, we should be planting a church because we've got some money to do it. And instead of wondering where the money's going to come from, guess what he had? He had the money in the bank because he planned and was committed to it. So he went and recruited Joel Trainer, and Joel Trainer came and interned at the church, did a residency. And what Mark said was like what most pastors said is, you can have access to anybody in the church you want for the church plant you're going to do. Is that what most pastors do? Not so much. So he did. So church of 220 people. Joel has free access to whoever he wants to recruit. Mark is pushing the fact that we're a church planting church, and I want you to consider what the Holy Spirit wants you to do. And 60 of those people went with him to plant the church. 8 of those couples actually sold their houses and bought houses into the community where the church plant was going to be. So they launched 3 Creeks Church in 2020, and they had over 200 people in their launch, and they're running 250 people now. We have dozens and dozens of people coming to know Christ and baptisms. And guess what? Now they're talking about planting another church out of 3 Creeks Church. Well, 3 Creeks and Movement Church decided last couple years ago that they wanted to plant a church together, and they planted another church this past year in the city of Columbus altogether. And that's been really, really incredible. They had their first service actually at Christmas time, well, right before Christmas, and they weren't able to launch because of all the COVID stuff right over all the years. So they're still kind of in their launch series, but they're doing awesome. And Grandview Heights is where they're planting that church. And so God has been planting churches in our family. We've had some other church starts that we're in process of doing. We have a church start that's in Florida, out of got a brain cramp here in terms of Jason Brown's church. You know what that is, Robert? What's the guy got a brain cramp on the name?
I know Jason Brown, but I don't know who he is.
Oh, you know who Jason Brown is? Okay.
Yeah, I know who he is.
Okay. Well, his church planted a church that's on the ocean side. It's called Ocean View Christian Fellowship, and they're just starting to get that thing off the ground and go public. And they've been running for a couple of years because COVID's been a little bit tricky with them. But their church is really interesting because they have about 50 people gathering, and the average age of the people coming to their church is like 23. Wow. It's really incredible. And all these young people coming to that church. And lots of people coming to know Christ and getting saved, and they take them down to the beach and they baptize them. It's just really amazing what's going on in Ocean View Christian Fellowship. But pray for that church story. I was talking to you guys last night about the church in Towson, Maryland. It's just outside of Baltimore. Dane Caraway and his wife Anna are planting there. They've just been gathering this past season, and they're going to launch publicly in September. They really need your prayer. They have about 35 or 40 folks that are part of what they're gathering now. We have another church plant that started in Tampa, Florida. Wade Reininger, who's part of our assist team, moved to Tampa last summer, and he's starting to gather. He's doing a parachute church plant. So when we call it a parachute church plant when you show up and you don't know anybody. The best kind of church planting is daughter church planting, where you have a base of people that you can take from a mother church to help you get things going. But so normally in a parachute church plant, we look at 4 to 5 years to get that thing going. But he's starting to gather already. He's had his first gathering just a couple weeks ago. He had over 40 people there for his first gathering, which is incredible. He's only been there for a year. So we'll see how God continues to lead him. He's got a new teammate that just signed up and is moving his family from Pennsylvania down to Tampa, looking for work and setting up a job and trying to figure out how that's going to go. So can you pray for the church plant in Tampa, Florida? Our fellowship is part of a movement of churches that's actually trying to get after the gospel and starting to grow. We also have churches that are in trouble and they've been in decline. We're working with those churches to see a new day. We're trying to work to help them find a way forward. So some of the churches that we've been engaging, one of the churches is in Aiken, South Carolina. They lost their pastor a couple years ago. He stepped down, and we started to work with them to bring a new pastor in. And he's been there now for about I guess he'll be there a year and a half right now. And he's doing a fantastic job. And they're looking to relaunch in the fall. So the strategy that we work with when we work with revitalizing or restarting churches, we have a 5-step process. I'll share that with you real quickly. So the first step that we work with a church that's in trouble is we help them to be unified. Because lots of times churches aren't unified. And so we want to unify the church. Jesus says a house divided against itself cannot stand, right? So we want to unify the church. What are we unifying them around? We unify them around wanting a new future together. And so how do we help a church find a new future together? Working in partnership with Assist, because we're going to help them. We don't control churches. We work to partner with churches to help them. And we have a 5-step plan, and we ask them to commit to that 5-step plan. And so we unify around working with Assist, wanting a new future, committing to that 5-step plan, which will take 3 years. So it takes us 3 years minimum to work with a church to help it find a new way forward. The first step we do is we unify the church. The second step we do is we find a leader if there isn't one already. We help them find a leader, because without a leader, you're not going to be able to move forward. You can't go from where you are to where you need to be without leadership. It's not going to happen. So lots of churches are focused on Bible teaching and shepherding, which is awesome, and those gifts are really important. But you can have good Bible teaching and good shepherding and not good leadership. We need good leadership to move the church forward. So we look for that piece. Once we find a leader, we actually work with the leader to help build a team. And so it's really important that the church works and cooperates together. There's more than one person pushing the ball up the hill, right? So we want to build a team. So we get a team together, and that team works to revision the church and create a new future for it. Most of the churches that we're working with are churches that were established dozens of years ago. And so their vision, their strategy, and their ethos are connected to a community and a culture that is long since passed. And so to find a new way forward, we have to revision those churches. We create teams that will help to revision that church and find a new way forward. The last step, that once we get the team together and we create a plan, the next step is actually to relaunch the church with that new plan and that new vision. Most of the time, what churches think that they need is they need more people. If we just had more people, we would kill it. We got one. No, I had a business once. I ran it for 5 years, and I had grown the business to about $1 million in sales. And it took a lot of work to get there, and it was quite a deal. But I asked the Lord, I said, Lord, if you could just give me more sales, I would be doing so much better, because my problem is I need more sales. So the Lord blessed me, and He gave me about 25% more sales. But what happened was I actually lost money. You say, well, how did that happen? Well, because my team who was working in the business didn't have good structures and systems, and couldn't manage the sales as they were coming in. So they were making mistakes, and things were not working right. And I had to actually reimburse people and pay things back. And I lost more money with the more sales that I had than I was gaining more than. It wasn't about the sales. My problem was I wasn't organized. I didn't have a strategy. I didn't have a good structures. I didn't have good systems. I didn't have the right people in place to do the job that needed to be done. So before I got more sales, I had to figure out how to actually restructure and reorganize the business. And that's the same thing is true mostly with lots of churches. People think if we just had more people, we would be better. Well, maybe not. If you get 100 more people, what would you do with them? And how are they going to stay? And how are they going to stay? So the illustration that I use for churches to help them understand our strategy and how we work with them is, if we're going to have a big party over my house tonight, which would be horrible because it's Mother's Day and I'm not there. But in our family has been in COVID. In Canada, it's been very, very restrictive. We haven't been allowed to have people in our house at all. And there's lots of rules that we've had to follow. So we haven't really cleaned our house. Like, my wife is hopefully not watching this. The house is clean, okay? The house is clean. But it's not company clean, right? Right? Because it's one thing to clean your house that you're living in. It's another thing to invite people over, and then now we clean the house. And if the mother-in-law is coming over, we really clean the house, right? So that's the deal. So we haven't had anybody in our house besides my kids' friends, right? So we haven't really cleaned up. So 50 people show up and the house isn't really clean. That's not good. Then there's no place for them to sit because the table has all of the kids' homework and mail and keys, and we weren't expecting anybody to show up, and so there's no place for people to sit down. And we didn't expect 50 people, so there's no food when we have enough for a couple people to eat something, but nothing for 50 people. So how's the party going to go? Yeah, it's going to be pretty bad, right? So what do we have to do? We have to clean the house, we have to set the table, we have to finish making the food, and then we can open the door and let people in. So the strategy that we work with churches to help them revitalize and find a new way forward is we unify the church around wanting a new future together. We find a leader, build a team, make a plan, and then we work the plan. So that's our 5-step strategy that we're working with churches. We're working with churches all across North America in that context, and God has been very gracious to us in that process. In the process of us moving forward, we're taking on lots of projects, and so we're trying to grow our team, and so you can pray for us as we try to figure out how to manage appropriately the work that God has given us by His blessing as we work together. My brother Phil, my twin brother, is on our team. He's full-time. Bart Blair, who lives here in Texas, he moved here in Texas a couple years ago, is on our team full-time. He oversees our revitalization and restart process. Mark Artrip is on our team, but he's only somewhat part-time because he's a full-time pastor. But he oversees our church planning. Dan O'Deans works with us, and he helps us with recruitment, but he's only part-time. I have an administrative person who manages our operations. His name is Mike Gentis. You probably would know Mike, or know of Mike. You guys would probably know him. He oversees our operations, but he's only part-time. And Ted and Elise Adamianis, who oversee all of our administration and books and accounting and legal stuff. They're supposed to be part-time, but they work 60 hours a week, so they're awesome. So that's our team. That's who we are, and we've been functioning in a fellowship now for 5 years. We officially got our national status this past year, and we're so excited to be here today and talk about who we are and to get to know who you are and talk about our ministry. So I did want to give you guys an opportunity to ask me any question you'd want to about our organization and what we're doing. I brought some brochures with us. They're older ones. Robert was happy about that they were older newsletters. But it's the only ones I had on my person. All the new ones are gone. So feel free to grab one of those if you'd like to have one. Does anybody have anything that they want to ask me about our fellowship, what's going on in the fellowship, our organization Assist? Because I'm happy to answer those questions and engage you in that way.
So how are our churches in Africa doing? I know we get quite a few in Africa.
We have lots and lots of churches in Africa. And I'm not that familiar because I don't work with the mission and I have never been to Africa. But I know that this past year was the 100th year anniversary of the Gribbles going to Central African Republic. And I think we have somewhere around 1,500 churches in Central African Republic and almost 1 million believers. So that's incredible.
I want to say that because I know we talk about 210 churches in the United States, but our fellowship is so mission minded.
Yes. Yes.
I know one time they announced that 4 of every 5 members of the fellowship were black.
Yes. Yeah.
Of course, you go to a conference and you see none of those,
Right.
because they're all in Africa.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and that's a real challenge. Like so, even this year, so in Africa, yeah, we've got stuff in the Chad, the Cameroon, the Central African Republic, and we actually had some churches in Nigeria. I think that I was told that this is last year's conference that actually contacted the fellowship and said, "Hey, we're Grace Brethren. We haven't been able to connect with you guys," and so they actually brought like 4 or 5 churches in from Nigeria. I believe that's what the David Giles told us at the conference. So there in Africa, we have a thriving ministry there. And what's interesting is all those countries have their own national organizations, and the U.S. is not pushing the agenda for those people. They have their own national organizations. They have their own schools. They have their own missions agencies. They're functioning without the U.S. control or influence on what they're doing, which is really, really, really exciting. Yeah. Any other questions for me? Well, you got me here. You can ask me anything you want. Some of you may know very little about the Charis Fellowship, but some of you may know a lot. But,
Well, we still call it Grace Brethren, so I guess we have to change to Charis, not carrots.
yeah, we changed it to Charis just 4 or 5 years ago, primarily because we wanted to update our name and brand for our movement. And that was done internationally. So the Charis Alliance, which is the national, the international association of Charis Fellowship churches across the world, changed their name to Charis. And they chose the word Charis because it's the Greek word for the word grace. And grace is the driving name and concept that's behind who we are as a movement. They liked it. And of course, in the rest of the world, they don't speak English. They speak other languages, French and Sango and whatever they speak, wherever they are. So they chose to use the Greek word as a way to unify and be a unifying name. And so when the National Fellowship here in the United States decided to go through a name search to change the name to something that we could work with, everybody wanted to keep the name Grace. But the problem was, when you use the word grace in a Christian context as an organization, you don't distinguish yourself. There are literally tens of thousands of grace whatever. And so, who are you? Well, we're part of the Grace movement. Okay, like which of the 5,000 of those are you part of? So they wanted to come up with a name that actually made us unique and you could identify who we were by the title. So it's new for people because they were always called Grace Brethren. It's different, but it actually helps to create that specific identity and clarity on it. Because there aren't that much. There are actually some organizations, but not very many called Charis. But most of you never heard of that before. So. But it's the Greek word for the word grace. So we're part of the Grace Fellowship, Charis Fellowship of Churches, and so that's how that name came to be.
So when you find a church that you want to help revitalize
or restart.
And of course a lot of that takes money.
Yeah.
So where does the money come from?
So our organization doesn't charge churches anything. So we get our support from the rest of the fellowship and individuals who get behind us, and we don't charge the individual church any resources at all. It's to us, we serve the fellowship and serve the churches that are in challenge, and it doesn't make any sense for us to charge a church that's in trouble.
Right.
Doesn't make any sense at all. So we come as a ministry of our family to any church that needs it. So that's how we operate. So we operate by faith in that way.
So it depends on gifts and offerings from the 110.
Yeah. Well, the rest of the 220 churches that we asked.
220.
Yeah. And then when a church works with us as well, so we have churches that we have worked with and what we've called graduated because we would have finished the program with them. We're asking those churches on exit, now that they're growing and healthy, to support us so that we can go and help other churches. Right. And then we also ask those churches to put money aside to plant because we want to see reproduction happen.
What are the type of troubles that the church looks for, and which is the number one trouble?
The number one issue for most churches is that they're aging out.
Okay.
And so the church was effective at one time, and its strategy and philosophy was great at one time. But most churches, most churches have a life cycle. So the average life cycle of a church is 50 years. So a church starts and it's usually somewhat strong, and then something will happen, and maybe they lose their leader, and they split, they plateau, they get a new leader, they grow again. But whenever the church peaks, whatever the peak of the church was, so let's say this church in Aiken used to be 400 people, and that was in 1995, it was 400 people. So whatever was happening in 1995, it was working, right? They were reaching people were being discipled, people were getting saved. And so that's what drives the ethos of the church, because the people now identify the church as that period. And so what happens is when the church starts to plateau and decline, what do the people want to do? They want to do more of 1995, right? Because that's how they got saved, and that's how they grew in their faith. So that must mean that's how everybody else should grow in their faith, and everybody else should get saved. And so it's not because they don't love God and they don't love the Bible, it's because they live in their own experience and they understand their own culture. The problem is what year is it now? Yeah, has the culture changed outside at all? Yeah, a little bit. And the demographics likely have changed too. So they're trying strategies, not because they don't love the Lord and aren't motivated, that are not effective missiologically to reach the people that God's called them to, who are there today. Not that they're people who were there yesterday, but people who are there today. And the churches typically codify their culture, and they think anything apart from that, and I'm kind of generalizing, but anything apart from that is not biblical. It doesn't honor Jesus, even though it's mostly cultural. Right? So what happens is you got two things happening at once. One is you're no longer effectively reaching lost people. And when you stop reaching adults for Jesus, you're going to die. You're one generation away from death. You're 22 to 30 years away from death when you stop reaching adults for Christ. Not kids, which is great. You reach kids, please reach kids. When you stop reaching adults for Christ in your church, the day you stop doing that is the day your church starts to die. So you have to reach adults for Christ. So what happens is when you stop reaching lost people, then that's a big problem. And the church is aging out because